Hi there. I think I've gone ahead and shared the link everywhere that I need to. Every week I forget to paste this in at least one place I intend to share. But I think this time I've got it. As always, my name is Benjamin Moeller. This is Microstream. We are looking at tiny stuff underneath the microscope that I have in my living room. And today is a continuation of the last several weeks. We're looking through sediment from New Mexico, the Cretaceous of New Mexico. This is marine sediment, so in theory I'm looking for more pieces of shark teeth and fish bones like we found in the surrounding area, but there is no guarantee. And in fact, I have been looking through sediment bagged from this site for the last several weeks and have not found anything. That is just part of what happens in doing micropaleontology and paleontology in general. Sometimes you just get no results. And so because of that, I'm going to do two things. Instead of having a boring stream where literally nothing happens, I mean, there's a little bit of music and a lot of sound from the air conditioning going off, which I am not going to pause for the recording. It's really hot. It is actually not 93 degrees, as it says on the bottom. For some reason, my computer thinks I'm in Vegas. I don't live in Vegas. It's hotter where I am right now than 93 degrees. I guarantee it. What was I talking about? Because there's just nothing to really... There's most likely not going to be anything to see in the actual Petri dishes while I sort through this stuff. Just to give something to actually, see while working on this, I thought I'd discuss a new topic. Sometimes I do this and I just listen to the music if I've got a lot of work to do, but I feel like I've had too many completely blank micro streams in a row, so I'm gonna try just kind of chatting for a little bit. And of course, if you're watching this live, you can jump into the YouTube live comments and I'll see that. Don't be weird or I'll block you. But I'm just gonna be sorting through this most likely sterile sample and talk about staying motivated to do science. I find myself thinking about this a lot because not so much in the context of work being tedious. I've been at this for I have to do the math in my head every single time. 18 years now. I've been participating in paleontology in some capacity. At first just field work, and then more and more field work, and then research and education and outreach, docenting and things like that, preparation. So I've been at this for a long time, and I've gotten used to work being tedious. I've gotten used to the idea that sometimes you put work into something and you don't get anything out, but that not getting results is literally part of science. Like, that's just part of it. Right now, I am completing a task, which is to remove all fossils from the sample, determine whether the sample contains any material, and therefore evaluate whether we need to come back to the site to collect more. And so far, the data I've gathered is that no, there's no reason to look through to bring back additional samples from this site. We can focus on doing other things. So this is part of figuring out the logistics of an expedition, is analyzing the sample, and if there's nothing in it, then we know we've got everything we can get. We can just move on. So that I don't necessarily mind. And there are plenty of ways to, get yourself through the tedium. I'm more or less constantly listening to podcasts, which is why I know way more than I would otherwise about things like history and technology, just listening to news and stuff like that, which isn't always the greatest thing to do for yourself psychologically. Sometimes you have to shake up what it is you're listening to. be careful what kind of media you lock yourself in a room with all day, every day during your work. So the tedium is not really a thing that I deal with, and yeah, I mean, I don't know. I suppose the advice I would give, if getting through the tedious parts and the fact that you're never guaranteed a result, is kind of to think of it as time to help you train. You know, if you have difficulty multitasking, maybe listening to a podcast while working isn't going to be the greatest, thing to help with, but you can usually, in my experience, find a way to make, to double dip on your time, essentially. I'm doing this thing, but at the same time, I can be using that as an opportunity to learn something else, right? Right now, I am not wasting my time, again, but I'm spending my time looking at dirt under a microscope that doesn't have anything in it. And I'm going to continue to do this for an entire hour, even though I'm pretty certain there's not going to be anything in it. But at the same time, I'm working on, practicing live broadcasts, using different software, OBS and Amscope, and YouTube live streaming and things like that. So I'm getting practice in, I guess technically practice in, microscope work, but I've been doing this for quite a long time. I'm not getting great returns on the microscope work, but, broadcasting and thinking about stuff to talk about, right? I did not prepare anything ahead of time. This is just what I would say if you would ask me that question while we're eating lunch, and I'm sitting there telling you my answer instead of eating, and eventually you're going to finish and I'm still going to be talking and I haven't actually eaten anything, so then I have to sit there and finish whatever I bought, or maybe you just go and it's awkward. Instead, we're doing this over the microscope, over the Microstream. So the other kind of motivation is feeling like there's so many different ways to kind of classify it, and I guess I wouldn't try to start with a set number of categories. I think I'm just going to describe different motivational deficits I've noticed and talk about how I've gotten through them. And while doing that, I'm swapping out different petri dishes of sediment, and you can possibly hear me messing around with my different jars and whatnot. I have a fan of ASMR in the household, and I know that they listen to these back when I'm out on vacation or whatever, and not around the house. So, sometimes I feel that there's difficulty in finding motivation when it seems like the surrounding circumstances, and this is probably the most relevant one to talk about, staying motivated to keep going when your surrounding circumstances are so absurdly ridiculous and becoming unglued. How does continuing to do science feel like the sane choice to make? How does it feel like a logical choice? What's motivating me to keep doing this when, for example, 5 years ago, when I was working under a microscope during a global pandemic in which I was locked down and only leaving my house about once a week to go to the grocery store and not seeing other people, and the way that the world changed so quickly and in what felt like such a permanent and fundamental way. There's been a huge effort to make the things that change not permanent, and they seem pretty short-sighted to me from a public health standard, but whatever. In the long run, I think we may end up being in more lockdowns because we chose not to learn enough lessons from the first time, but whatever, I'm not a public health guy. During that period of time, things felt so fundamentally different. This was before, in the summer of 2020, before we had a hope of a vaccine, we had no idea, we were like, this could go on for 10 years. We could be in lockdown until it basically rips through the population and we only have, people who have gotten it and stayed immune or whatever. It could be, we have to, more realistically, 2 to 3 years in lockdown before the vaccine starts. It was an incredible relief to get the news that vaccines were going to be ready as early as, late winter, early spring in 2021. Before then, we had no idea how long we were going to be in lockdown. And I still spent a good deal of that summer, which was extremely hot, and I did not have real air conditioning in my apartment when I was working from home, with this same microscope, by the way. I hold on to my equipment for a very long time, because I cannot afford to replace it. Anyway, I was doing exactly this during that period, and you may find that the period we're going through right now is equally ridiculous. Or more, maybe less so, but still quite unhinged, right? Everyone kind of has periods of times where they feel really unmoored from reality, some more so than others. Right now, I feel like I pretty much understand what's going on, but others may feel differently. How do you stay motivated to keep doing science when it seems like doing so is absurd? The idea of spending my time looking at dirt under the microscope. Part of it is just helping you maintain some stability of some continuity, and some degree of normalcy. If this is what's normal for you during periods of time when there's a lot of instability and a lot that's unknown, it has its purpose. Early on in 2020, I did a hike, being outdoors. I had a couple of people with me, but, we stayed masked in the car and then kept our distance during the hike itself. And we're out in the middle of nowhere where nobody else is. And something that I think really helps you stay grounded is realizing that out in the middle of nowhere, nothing changes. Out in the desert, out in the boonies, the stuff that happens, in the cities, on the internet, doesn't really impact what's going on out there in quite the same way. Of course, rural communities obviously still had COVID, obviously still felt the effects of the pandemic. But somewhere out there is a cactus, an ocotillo, a bush, a tree, whatever, that's been sitting there for 40 years, that's going to sit there for another 40 years. And a lot of stuff may change around it, but that stays the same. So, I don't know, in times when it feels like everything could change, realizing that, well, not 100% of things are going to change. Some stuff is so stable on the period of time, that I am attuned to, on the order of a human lifetime. Things like the mountains are so unmovable that they may as well be permanent. I will go back to, always reminding people that what the fossil record tells us, what geological time tells us, is that nothing is permanent in the end. Everything changes at some point. But sometimes holding on to something that can provide you with that continuity, even if it's not going to be the same degree of importance, significance, at every single stage of your life, having something that is still always there definitely helps. So this kind of work is like one of the only pieces of continuity that I have between myself and my 8-year-old self. At 26, I'm a completely different person, I like to think. but we still both do this one same activity, hiking around and looking for bones. That kind of helps. And the complete opposite spectrum, as I was talking about with the fact that actually nothing is permanent. There are plenty of things that happen on the scale, on the order of magnitude of time in which you are attuned to, again, the human lifespan, years, months, weeks, days, whatever. And sometimes, I hear from people that are scared to continue with something because they feel trapped, or because they feel they may become trapped. If I'm only ever doing this thing, I may be stuck with it forever. And you can actually lean on the fact that there are absolutely no permanent things in life, in reality. You can guarantee that change will come at some point, whether you like it or not. You don't really have to worry about things getting stuck, right? You may hate your dead-end job. A brand new, dream opportunity may show up in your inbox from a recruiter randomly on a Tuesday morning. The job that you always wanted but never knew how to articulate may be created next week, and you would have had no way of knowing. And then you would look back at being so stressed out about being stuck and not focusing on, improving yourself and being ready to make that leap when you look backwards, right? It's always, why was I so stressed out about X, Y, and Z at the time? So, I both somehow get motivation from the fact that doing science gives me continuity with the person that I used to be a very long time ago, and also with the fact that I don't know what might change in my life 15 years from now that might make it not possible for me to keep doing this. And it's going to feel really silly if I wasted so much time and energy on a personal crisis in 2025 when it turned out that, this was a finite thing. I actually wouldn't be able to do this for my whole life. There's just no way of knowing. I recently acquired a couple of new bookshelves. Last week, I went and picked up a couple of bookshelves because I brought home too many books. So a friend and mentor of mine passed away in February. Again, one of those, nothing is permanent. And I didn't feel trapped, during all the years that I worked for him, but I certainly didn't expect him to be gone so soon, unfortunately. So I certainly don't hope, in all the times when I was looking under a microscope in his lab at U of A as part of my job, as part of a paid gig, I hope there was never a time where I was worried about being stuck doing that forever. But at any rate, I've been helping clean out his offices, clean out his lab space, and, the family, his wife, and the student who is kind of helping, a former graduated student who is helping kind of clean this stuff out, kept offering, look at the bookshelves, take home anything you're interested in. And I always wanted, when I was growing up, to have a huge, library, and then I realized how expensive books are. and would only later, come to find alternatives to purchasing brand new books, we'll put it that way. But at the time, I just told myself, I need to not possess a ton of books. I'll never be able to read all of them. I will, I can't afford to like buy a whole collection of every single book that I want. So it would be wasting my time to really seriously consider that. Nowadays, because I have gotten so many, books given to me, books that I found at severe discount or something like that, or somebody was moving, they're giving away books, right? Just, someone's collection is dissolving, add to yours whatever you like. And now I actually have a ton of books, and it's really awesome. And I'm really fortunate that I was allowed to, take books from Dr. Cohen's collection to take with me, so that even though I can't spend time with him the way that we had both hoped, right, as a student again, and learning, electron microscopy and stuff like that, that at least I'd be able to, read his books. He actually signed on the inside, on the first page, all of his books. So I'll always know which ones in my collection stemmed from his original reading selection of books he had in his office. And I guess it'll just be, nice to, again, keep a little bit of that continuity and kind of retroactively, understand him a little better, or at least the perspectives he might have had, or the information that was available to him by reading through different books that presumably he had flipped through as well. I would say there were a few in there that definitely looked like I was the first one to crack them open, and you know what? It is what it is. I certainly will not read every book before I go. But there were others that had, little notes in them that I made sure that the family knew about. And there's something motivating about looking at those new bookshelves I put up, and the fact that there are so many books in there that I haven't looked at yet, that I picked out and said, I am interested in this, I want this in my collection, because who knows when the next opportunity will come for me to get my hands on one of these for free, right? So the fact that there are so many books on there gives me motivation to hope that at some point I can actually dedicate the time to sit down and read and actually get through that. I like seeing, an eventually conquered task in front of me and thinking about how much more I'm going to know and how much better of a writer I'm going to be, having read all of these different writing styles and ways of presenting information and things like that. But there's also actually, I didn't fill up the entire space. I've got a couple of extra shelves that are currently empty. And that gives me motivation too, because it means that I'm not done filling up this bookshelf. There's still going to be more that I can't foresee yet that's going to be in that monumental task that I'm going to, read as many of these books as I can while I still can. But I think it's definitely motivating to continue learning and continue doing science. If you think of learning in the way that I do, which is of knowledge being recursive, meaning that it kind of folds in on itself, and every new thing you learn has the potential of teaching you something more about something you already knew. So even beyond the titles of these books, I have no possible way of knowing what in all is going to be in there until I've read them. And I'm not sure what all those books are going to teach me until I've actually read it. Because I have no idea how acquiring this new information is going to enhance the knowledge that I already had. So there's all kinds of different things to look forward to. Right now, I'm trying to push myself forward on finally completing a manuscript that I've been working on for about 4 or 5 years now. I'll say about 4. It was one that I felt was potentially ready to get into peer review a while ago. And I'm glad that I didn't rush. And I'm glad that I not just waited for my skill of research and writing to improve before trying to put this in a final state. And I'm glad that I allowed other researchers and science itself to advance a little bit so that I could see all of what was new in these areas that I had only just started to breach, these topics that I'd only just started really looking into as part of this project. And I think something that might help with motivation is keeping in mind the fact that slow and steady wins the race. You've got to keep a realistic and healthy pace to get things done. And I don't feel that science is ever better for having been done as quickly as possible. The thing I want to avoid, of course, the thing that I get afraid of, is in taking so long to do something that it becomes one of these impossible tasks that, like, finishing such and such thing, even the idea of it becomes incomprehensible. You know, it seems like I have seen in some people's lives, not going to name any names, you know, task that is just like they've been talking about doing it forever and they haven't made any progress, or they're going backwards, you know. And I always feel like you can't let yourself get caught in that situation. You just have to get used to, even if it's not perfect, even if you feel like, you know, oh, what if it's not ready, just do it, just get it done. Don't worry about, like, you know, this could be a little bit better if I did these 5 extra things in the middle. And at some point you just have to call it and say, either I'm doing it or I'm not. And it's going to be damaging to myself mentally if I hold myself to the standard of finishing something that I know damn well is never going to get done. So I think part of having good motivation is actually being honest with yourself about what you want to accomplish, and being okay with the fact that you don't have to stick with everything you originally intend to do. It's okay to amend and reset goals, because you're ultimately accountable to yourself. There are other people who, you know, may say that they have, you know, authority over you, but in reality you are your own opinion. You are your own person. And at the end of the day, again, jobs end, relationships end. Your relationship with yourself is the only quote-unquote permanent one that you have, and so what you do has got to be for yourself, and you've got to be accountable ultimately to your goals and motivations. So keep motivated by being clear what you want versus what people are asking of you, or what the expectations are, or the circumstance driving you, and just being clear for yourself the difference between those things, so that you don't confuse your personal ambition with just keeping the lights on, you know? That way you don't start feeling like, why is it that I'm spending my entire life doing something that I dislike? Well, we're encouraged to think of ourselves as our job titles. It's the first thing I introduce myself with when I, do a video out in the field. And part of that is just because I feel like I have to constantly remind people that there is a difference between paleontologist and archaeologist. And if I say at the beginning of every video, I'm a paleontologist, and then show me looking at fossils, maybe someday we will have fewer people who think that archaeologists and paleontologists are the same, or aren't aware that paleontology even exists. Anyway, I think we're encouraged to think of ourselves as our job titles, but in the end, again, you're accountable to yourself, so think of yourself as being what you create instead, or a role that you play in your family or your community or whatever. You're not, unless this is what you really want to see yourself as, you're not a person who exists to pay off a mortgage. The mortgage is just a tool to get you into housing. And what if instead, you may do a 9-to-5 job to keep the house, to keep the lights on, and on the weekends you're helping organize, a community kickball game for the neighborhood or whatever. Who ultimately is it deciding whether you are your 9-to-5 job or you are the community organizer, right? You can just decide that you are the community organizer. And guess what? I think motivation stems from setting your own goals, defining yourself, after what you want to pursue and what you do pursue. And therefore, you're not confusing completion of tasks that we all have to do because of the system that we live with versus what you want to be contributing to the world. And furthermore, I want to, really emphasize the idea of taking it slow. You've got to slow your pace. And it makes for better science. It makes for better most things, actually, I think, when you take your time and you pay attention to detail. And when you're really good at something, you can go quick, right? I'm kind of speeding through these slides because I've been doing this for a very long time. I have had this microscope for somewhere between 10 and 15 years, I would have to guess. Something like that. I'm trying to remember which birthday it was I got this at. Oh, 1 second. My roommate co-host has arrived, and I accidentally had the door padlocked. But at any rate, knowing that you don't have to get it done in one breath, that's something that I have to remind myself of all the time. Don't hold your breath while trying to get something done, in a literal and metaphorical way. Breathe, walk, take your time. You cannot rush it. And the results are not going to be good if you try to rush it anyway. You might not ever get to the finish line if you set an unrealistic pace. And at the end of the day, again, you are accountable to yourself. And you can choose, I don't have to get this done in 2 years or 5 years or 10 minutes. Sometimes it takes as long as it takes. What temperature do you think it is outside? Only the high 90s?
Yeah, not over 100.
Well, my computer, which thinks that we're in Las Vegas, says it's 93 Fahrenheit, and that may be for Vegas, but I don't know that that's true here.
I feel like it's a little warmer here. Let's find out.
I believe it's about 99, so you're right. High 90s, not over 100 yet, but certainly not 93.
My phone says 99.
It will not be 93 degrees until 8 p.m. tonight.
For a brief period, it was actually warmer where my parents are.
In Sarita?
Other parents.
Oh, damn.
Mom was
I'm not gonna dox your parents' home location for when you listen to this back later. Yeah, I don't really say anything in these. Alright, I'm gonna keep looking through these for another little while. But I have pretty much yacked on for as long as I feel like it. Again, if you've got a question you want to drop, feel free to ask. But I'm going to write a little note to myself to edit the YouTube recording to finish about there. And I'm just going to shut my app and do my work for a little while. Shut my trap. Shut my yap doesn't mean anything. I'm yapping and I should shut my trap. Hello, people who just joined. I'm looking at Cretaceous marine sediment for a little while longer, and there hasn't been anything in it so far. Which means it's the perfect time to ask me weird and terrible questions if you feel like it. always seem to get more people jumping on right at the end. I feel like I should really move this streaming hour on Mondays from like 5 to 6. But we'll see. The radio is playing scary music again. Why is the classical station so spooky?
It was a very scary time back then.
The classical times.
Yeah.
The classical period. Alright, we're going on 5 o'clock, so I'm going to go ahead and call it there. Thanks for watching. I will see you next week.